I woke to a cold hand gripping my ankle, its nails digging into my skin. Before I could scream, it yanked hard, dragging me toward the edge of the bed, toward the dark, gaping nothing underneath. The map led me to the park the next day, a place I'd always found comforting. But as I stepped to the path, something felt wrong. The laughter of children, the chatter of joggers, it was all gone. The park was unnaturally silent, the kind of quiet that presses into your ears until you hear your own breathing, louder than you should. I followed the map deeper into the park, the trees growing thicker and gnarled the further I went. It guided me to a spot I didn't recognize, though I'd walked this park countless times. A tree towered above me, its roots twisted like clenched fists clawing at the earth. The map's red X was right here. I crouched and began brushing away leaves and dirt at the base of the tree. My fingers scraped something hard, a box. It was small and wooden, its surface rotted and damp. When I opened it, the smell of earth and decay hit me like a punch. Inside lay a broken compass, its needle jerking erratically in all directions. I picked it up, but the needle didn't steady. Even when I held still, it spun, as if possessed. Carved into the lid of the box, in a spidery hand, were the words, "Follow the needle, but be warned." I didn't understand, but a deep unease twisted in my gut. When I looked at the map again, it had changed. Looking fresh? A gust of wind swept through the park, rattling the tree branches like bones. I turned, certain. Someone was behind me, but saw nothing. The silence was back, heavier than ever. I didn't want to stay, but the map? It felt like it was watching me, daring me to go on. The compass needle jerked violently to the left as I left the park, pointing toward the outskirts of town. It was growing heavier. The field was barren, its grass burned to blackened stubs. At its center stood the skeleton of a farmhouse, charred beams jutting upward like broken bones. The smell of ash and something sour hung thick in the air, and the silence here was worse than the park. It wasn't just quiet. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, savoring the night. It was suffocating. I didn't want to go closer, but the compass needle quivered, pulling me forward. The map seemed to thrum in my hand, its red mark glaring at me like an open wound. Inside the wreckage, the ground crunched beneath my feet, ash and debris sticking to my shoes. Something glinted beneath a pile of soot. I knelt, my fingers trembling as I brushed it away. It was a photograph. My heart stopped when I saw it. It was me, standing exactly where I was now, my face pale and frozen. But it wasn't just me. In the background, just barely visible, was a shadowy figure. Its shape was wrong, its edges blurred, like it wasn't fully there. I flipped the photo over, my fingers slick with sweat. Scrawled in uneven handwriting was a single word, tomorrow. A sudden rustling behind me made me whip around, but the field was empty. Still, I could feel it. Something was there, watching, waiting. The compass needle spun wildly now, pointing to nowhere and everywhere at once. I stuffed the photo into my pocket and stumbled back, but the air seemed thicker, heavier. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I couldn't stand the map anymore. I crumpled it into a ball and threw it in the trash. The relief was instant, until I turned around and saw it sitting neatly on my desk, unfolded, its edges pristine. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, refusing to touch it, but something on the map had changed. The next red X was marked at a place I knew too well, my childhood home. It was a place I swore I'd never return to. The fire had taken everything. I drove there anyway, the map on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. The house was a hollow shell, blackened by flames, the roof caved in. The air still carried the faint smell of burnt wood and something else, something sour, like old decay. Stepping inside was like walking into a memory I didn't want to relive. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and ash puffed up with every step. The room where the fire had started looked frozen in time, untouched since that night. Then I saw it. On the ground, half buried in ash, was a watch. I knew that watch. My father had been wearing it the night of the fire. Its face was cracked. The hand stopped at exactly 3:13 a.m., the moment the flames had consumed the house. The room grew colder. A soft whisper tickled the edge of my hearing, coming from nowhere, and everywhere, at once. The map remembers. The voice grew louder, overlapping with itself, until it was a cacophony. Shadows flickered on, the walls twisting and stretching toward me. I stumbled back, clutching the watch, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The map was in my hand again, though I didn't remember picking it up. Its next X was already marked. I tried explaining everything to a friend, desperate for someone to ground me, to say this wasn't real. They laughed, saying it sounded like a prank or the result of a little too much stress. I wanted to argue, but their words felt distant, like they were speaking through a thick fog. That night, my phone buzzed, cutting through the oppressive silence of my apartment. The number was unlisted. Against every instinct, I answered. At first, there was nothing. Then came the breathing. Slow, deep, deliberate. My hand shook, gripping the phone tighter. Just as I was about to hang up, a whisper slithered through the speaker. The next mark is waiting. I dropped the phone, heart racing as if it might break through my chest. When I picked it up, again, the line was dead. I turned around to see the map lying open on the coffee table. Though I hadn't touched it all evening, my pulse quickened. The next red X was marked over the bridge, on the outskirts of town. The drive was a blur, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. The bridge loomed in the moonlight, the water below dark and still, like an endless void. The map trembled in my hands, its paper feeling almost alive, pulsing faintly with warmth. Beneath the bridge, I found an old weathered journal tucked into a crevice. My stomach turned as I opened it. Handwriting filled the page, describing a drowning that had happened 20 years ago to the day, but I wasn't even born then. The wind picked up suddenly, carrying whispers that seemed to rise from the water. They echoed, my voice repeating my words back to me, louder, sharper, until I couldn't tell if they were inside or outside my head. I backed away, clutching the journal, but the map was already burning into my hand again, dragging me to the next mark. The map's next mark was labeled the Chasm of Mirrors. My chest tightened as I read it, the words radiating dread. It led me to the abandoned shopping mall on the outskirts of town, a place I hadn't thought of in years. The building was decaying, its walls streaked with mold, its windows shattered. Inside, the air was cold, the kind that cuts through your skin and sinks into your bones. Glass littered the floor, jagged shards catching the faint moonlight seeping through broken skylights. I moved carefully, but the crunch of glass beneath my shoes echoed unnaturally, like the sound was following me. As I stepped into the heart of the mall, I saw them. Mirrors. Dozens of them. Some intact, others cracked or shattered, all reflecting distorted versions of myself. At first, I thought it was just the warped glass. But as I walked, I noticed something wrong. In one mirror, my reflection lingered a second too long after I turned away. In another, it smiled, its lips twisting into a grin I wasn't making. The further I went, the worse it got. Some reflections had hollow eyes. Others were smeared with shadow, as though something dark was pressing against the glass from the other side. At the center of the mall was the largest mirror yet, its surface cracked like a spiderweb. Scrawled across it in jagged crimson letters were the words, "The truth awaits." My hand shook as I reached out. The instant my fingers touched the glass, it shattered. The sound, like a scream. Behind the shards, embedded in the frame, was another piece of the map. This one was different. The red X pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and the map felt warm against my skin. A whisper rose behind me, low and guttural. I didn't dare turn around. The map burned in my hand, the red X pulsing faintly like it was alive. My feet moved without permission, carrying me toward the forest. The compass needle spun wildly, but I didn't need it. The map knew the way, and so did I. The woods swallowed me whole, the towering trees closing in like the bars of a cage. There was no trail, just a suffocating maze of branches and undergrowth. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with the smell of damp earth and rot. Every rustle of leaves felt deliberate. Every shadow seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I reached the heart of the woods and froze. The structure rose before me, crumbling and ancient, its stones slick with moss. The doorway yawned open, a black maw that swallowed the pale moonlight. My breath came shallow, each step inside feeling like I was descending into a grave. In the center of the room, it stood, the shadow from the photograph. It wasn't fully there, its form flickering like smoke caught in a windless room. Its presence seeped into my mind, dredging up memories I couldn't place. A child screaming in the dark, a fire roaring, and a name, whispered over and over, mine. The shadow raised an arm, skeletal and impossibly long, pointing to the far wall. My knees buckled when I saw it. My name was carved into the stone, alongside hundreds of others. But, unlike the rest, my name was scratched over violently, as if erased. A whisper rose, low and guttural. You are chosen. The shadow moved closer, its form twisting and stretching, and I realized with horror that it wasn't a shadow at all. It was something trying to become me. My legs refused to move. The map slipped from my hand, and the world went black. The shadow stretched out a hand, offering the map as if it were a gift, or a curse. I didn't want to take it, but my body betrayed me. My hand closed around the parchment on its own, and the moment I touched it, the map began to change. Faint lines bled through the surface, forming shapes and symbols I hadn't seen before. The paths I'd followed were crossed out, but new ones appeared, twisting and spiraling in impossible directions. My heart raced as I saw places I recognized, memories etched into the map, except they weren't memories anymore. They were different. The fire that destroyed my childhood home was there, but I saw myself standing in the flames. Smiling said, the bridge, where I found the journal, it was no longer empty. A figure stood in the water, arms outstretched, and I knew it was me. The shadow's voice slithered into my ear, low and cold. Every choice leads here. The map decides. You cannot escape. My hands trembled as the map began to glow, the ink burning into my mind. The red X shifted, sliding across the parchment like a living thing, stopping over my current location. My knees buckled as the walls of the structure began to groan and close in, stone grinding against stone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a deafening chant of my name. I clawed at the map, desperate to tear it away, but it wouldn't budge. Its edges curled and seared into my skin, fusing with my flesh. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The shadow loomed closer, no longer flickering but solid and human. Its face, it was mine. I fell to my knees as the map pulsed, its lines rearranging again. The last thing I saw before everything went black was a new X. It was waiting for someone else. I woke up on the floor of my apartment, the map clenched in my trembling hand. My chest, my face hurt, heaved as I gasped for air, my heart pounding like it might burst. The room was dim, the blinds half-clothes, letting in weak, gray light. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then I saw the map. Its surface was blank, the markings, symbols, and red X's erased like they had never existed. But in its center, faintly etched into the parchment, was my name. My throat tightened. The map was singed black, as though it had been burned into my skin and pulled free. I stumbled to the mirror above my sink, desperate to see myself, to prove I was still real. The reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't mine. The face in the glass was hollow, its eyes dark pits that seemed to stretch forever. It smiled. Crooked, joyless grin that sent ice through my veins. My legs buckled, and I grabbed the sink to keep from falling. Then the reflection spoke. Its voice wasn't mine, but I understood every word. You're part of the map now. I staggered back, clutching the map tighter. As I looked down, new lines and symbols began to lead through its blank surface, as though written in invisible ink. Beneath it, a name I didn't recognize. The map had chosen its next victim. A whisper brushed against my ear, so close I could feel the cold of its breath. It's their turn. Now, I tried to scream, but no sound came. The map grew hot in my hand, its edges curling like it was. alive, and the room darkened. Now as you read this, check your surroundings. Is it quiet? Too quiet? Are you sure you're alone? Or has the map already chosen you? I woke to the sound of breathing, slow, ragged, and not my own. My eyes darted to the corner of the bathroom, where a shadow stood too still to be human. As I stared, it took a step closer, and I realized it. It wasn't breathing. It was laughing. The moment I set the diary aside, I felt a wave of relief. False. Fleeting. I told myself it wasn't. Yet real. My mind had to be playing tricks on me, twisting the harmless scrawl into something sinister. But deep down, I felt it watching. I went back to unpacking, determined to push the incident out of my head. As I sorted through old boxes, my movements became mechanical. Fold, stack, discard. But my thoughts circled. Back to the diary. It was just a book. Or so I thought. When I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink, I froze. The diary was on the counter, open to a fresh page. My breath hitched as I saw the new message scrawled in my handwriting. I need you to understand. My pulse quickened. I hadn't moved the diary, hadn't even opened it since putting it down. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. They were blank. No, not blank. Waiting. I grabbed a pen, my grip shaky, and wrote in the margin, "Who are you?" I stared at the words, willing them to stay put, to prove I wasn't losing my mind. The response came before I could even blink. "Who do you think I am?" I staggered back, heart pounding as the letters twisted and shifted. They no longer looked foreign. They were mine. My exact handwriting, every curve and jagged line. The room felt colder. Every sound around me, from the ticking clock to my own breaths, seemed amplified. Didn't leave me. It wouldn't let me go. I woke to darkness. It wasn't the comforting, familiar kind where you know the world is still there, waiting for you to open your eyes. This was oppressive, thick, and suffocating, as if the room itself had disappeared. The whispers started faintly, curling around the edges of my mind like smoke. But the tone chilled me. Soft, mocking, hungry. Then I felt it. The unmistakable weight of someone watching me. My chest tightened, and I struggled to move, to sit up, but my body wouldn't respond. The air pressed down like a lead blanket. When I finally broke free, gasping and drenched in sweat, the whispers stopped. I fumbled for the lamp, my hands shaking, and flooded the room with light. My heart skipped a beat. The diary was on my chest, its weight cold and wrong. I didn't remember bringing it to bed. I didn't remember even touching it since I shoved it in the drawer. Slowly, as though afraid it might bite, I lifted it off me. The cover flipped open on its own, and fresh ink glistened on the page. "Did you dream of me? You should." The room went still, unnaturally so, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then, in the corner of my eye, a shadow moved. I whipped my head toward it, but there was nothing there, just the faint outline of furniture, bathed in the dim light. Toward me, as if alive. The air turned icy, my breath visible in the light. And then, I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing just outside my bedroom door. I wasn't alone. Something was waiting, watching, and it wasn't going to leave. The library smelled of old paper and mildew, a comforting contrast to the dread clinging to me. But comfort didn't last. As I approached the counter, the elderly librarian's friendly expression faltered when I mentioned the diary. Her hand froze midair, and she leaned in close. Her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have brought that here." I blinked. "What?" Her gaze darted around as if expecting someone, or something, to overhear. "It's the diary, isn't it?" The air felt heavier, the silence deeper. I asked what she meant, and her story spilled out in pieces, like she was trying to forget as she spoke. Years ago, there'd been a reclusive writer, a strange, obsessive man. People in town whispered about his experiments with dark rituals. He claimed he could trap a piece of his soul in his work, ensuring he'd never truly die. But something went wrong, she said, her voice trembling. He vanished, No body, no trace. Just that diary. Her words turned colder, harsher. Anyone who finds it becomes attached. It feeds on them. Their fear, their secrets, their life. My stomach twisted, the memory of the diary's words burning in my mind. I need you to understand. I asked what it wanted, my voice a desperate croak. The librarian stared at me, her pale eyes glassy with fear. It wants an anchor, she said. To keep it in this world. Her hands shook as she gestured for me to leave. If you're lucky, it isn't too late. But deep down, I knew luck had nothing to do with it. The diary wasn't waiting for me to understand. It was waiting for me to give in. The first sign something was wrong came when I tried to call a friend. The line didn't even ring again. This time, a faint, distorted whisper seeped into my ear before the call dropped entirely. Emails were worse. Every message I sent came back undeliverable. But the diary somehow. The diary knew. The house grew darker, not just from flickering power but something deeper. Light seemed thinner, weaker, unable to reach the corners. And the mirrors? They no longer reflected just me. Shapes moved behind me, vague and impossible to focus on, always shifting when I turned. Once, I caught the outline of a face. Sharp, hollow, grinning. But when I spun around, there was nothing there. The diary's words became sharper, more intimate. It described the treehouse I'd built as a child, how I cried when it collapsed. It knew about the letter I never sent to my estranged father. Things I had never spoken aloud, never shared. And yet, there was a strange comfort in its words. They didn't mock. They understood. Every line felt like a balm to the ache I didn't know I carried. But comfort turned to fear when I found my own handwriting filling the pages. I hadn't written those words, but there they were. Raw admissions. Confessions I'd never dare to say. I tried throwing the diary into a closet, locking it away, but it didn't matter. It always returned to my bedside, waiting, patient. One night, I found a new line written in bold ink. You can't run from me, because I am you. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick and suffocating. The diary wasn't just invading my life. It was becoming part of me. The first time it happened, I thought I was losing my mind. I opened the door to the hallway, but instead of leading to the familiar stretch of creaking floorboards, it opened to, somewhere else. Went straight to. I stood frozen, staring into an impossible space, a corridor that twisted and stretched, its walls pulsing like a living thing. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing in a language I couldn't understand but felt in my bones. Slamming the door shut, I stumbled back, heart racing. When I opened it again, the hallway was normal, as though nothing had changed. But the feeling lingered. The diary wasn't just observing anymore. It was warping reality. Every time I entered a room, something was off. The furniture shifted, slightly wrong. A chair. The corner faced me no matter where I stood. The attic, once cramped and cluttered, now seemed endless. A maze of shadows and faint laughter, and the diary's messages grew worse. It didn't wait for me to open it anymore. Its words appeared in the corner of my vision, scrawled across walls and reflected in mirrors. The riddles taunted me, accusing and cryptic. You've always belonged to me. Then came the mirror. I caught my reflection staring at me long after I'd turned away, its head tilted, lips curling into a smile that wasn't mine. I froze, too terrified to move, as it pressed a hand to the glass from the edges. Inside, fog spread from its touch, forming words that chilled me to my core. Set me free. I backed away, trembling, but the reflection didn't follow. It stayed in the mirror, watching, its paranoid eyes sweeping the hallways and spaces, waiting. The diary's grip tightened. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. It whispered inside me now, a voice that felt more familiar with every passing second. I wasn't losing control. I was being erased. I couldn't stay in the house, but the diary wouldn't let me leave. Every time I stepped outside, the world felt wrong. The street stretched too long, the sky too dim, as if the edges of reality had blurred. The air was colder up there, thick with the smell of dust and decay. In the corner, beneath a stack of rotting books, I found a bundle of faded papers tied with fraying twine. My hands shook as I untied it, revealing brittle pages filled with the same sharp handwriting as the diary. The words weren't prose. They were instructions, rituals, descriptions of sacrifices, symbols, all leading to one chilling conclusion. The writer hadn't vanished. They'd bound themselves to the diary, creating a vessel to prolong their existence. But the cost was steep. The words blurred before my eyes as I read the final lines. Each reader is a host. Each life strengthens my form. A sickening realization settled in my chest. The diary wasn't a prison. It was a trap. Every victim, drawn in by its whispers, became fuel for the writer's return. Then I saw it. A single, fresh page tucked among the ancient papers. My name was scrawled. Hers was not. His journal was piled high. Across it, over and over, in frantic, jagged lines. Beneath it, the words, "You brought me back." I staggered back, the papers falling from my hands. The shadows in the attic shifted, coiling toward me. A whisper, soft and familiar, curled around my ear. "Do you remember what you..." Deep flashes of a memory surged forward. Something I'd buried, something I couldn't face. Betrayal. A choice I'd thought forgotten. The diary had known all along. It had used that guilt to bind me tighter. The attic door slammed shut. The shadows surged closer. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't about survival. This was about becoming something far worse. The shadows pressed in around me, writhing like living things. The diary lay open on the floor, its pages filled with frantic, overlapping words. "Write your name. Let me in. Become whole." The demand was clear. My hand twitched toward the pen without my consent. The house groaned, the walls trembling as if the whole structure would collapse under the weight of something unseen. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat slower, heavier, like the house itself was trying to pull me under. I grabbed the diary and hurled it into the fireplace. It was simply a shroud. There was nothing to stop it, leaping hungrily toward the brittle pages. The flames didn't consume the diary. They revealed new words, black and searing, appearing across the burning surface. "You can't destroy what you are." I staggered back, my mind racing. It wasn't just haunting me. It was connected to me. Every decision, every failure, every moment of pain in my life had been leading me here. The diary wasn't an accident. It had chosen me. The whispers returned, deafening now. A chorus of voices overlapping. The attic swirled with shadows, forming shapes, faces, hands, hollow eyes, form shifting until it matched my own reflection. Wrong. They weren't mine. "They're ready," it said, its voice layered with mine. "I made you for this." Tears burned in my eyes as I reached for the diary, my hand trembling over the pen. If I wrote my name, the whispers would stop. The torment would end. But what would I become? I hesitated, gripping the pen tighter as the walls around me warped and buckled. Shadows clawed at my legs, pulling me closer. My reflection's grin widened as it stepped into the fire, its voice echoing, "The only way out is in." I had to decide, and the diary waited, always waiting. The attic dissolved into shadows, the house groaning as if it were alive, closing in on me. The diary sat on the floor, its pages glowing faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. Out of the glass, grinning with my face, its hand extended toward the pen that had rolled to mine. "Right," it said, the word echoing in my mind. "Finish what you started." My legs buckled as whispers crowded my thoughts, a cacophony of voices urging me forward. Each step felt heavier, my body no longer entirely my own. The diary's pull was undeniable. Now, a tether dragging me to my fate. I dropped to my knees, my hand trembling as I reached for the pen. The diary opened itself to a blank page, the words already forming in my mind before I could write them. My name, my life, my surrender, or freedom, the reflection whispered, leaning closer. Its grin twisted into something darker, more sinister. "You can't destroy me, but you can choose." Tears burned down my cheeks as I stared at the page. Every instinct screamed to resist, but I could feel the truth. The diary wasn't just a trap. It was a legacy. If I didn't take the pen, it wouldn't stop. It would find someone else, someone weaker, someone unprepared. I wrote my name. The ink burned into the page, searing through my veins. The attic shuddered violently, and the reflection laughed, a distorted, triumphant sound as it dissolved into me. My body convulsed, the whispers growing silent as darkness enveloped everything. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting at my desk. The diary lay closed before me, its surface smooth and unmarked. I looked into the mirror and saw myself smiling, but the eyes weren't mine anymore. The diary was empty now, waiting for the next story. My story. If you dare, share this story, but remember, every retelling brings it closer to reality. And as you close this tale, ask yourself, are you sure you're alone? Or has something already found you?